Sometimes, the love we have for our companions makes us carry secrets that weigh heavier than grief itself. When 73-year-old Walter Brennan finally brought his beloved German Shepherd to Dr. Elise Monroe's clinic, his hands shook not from age, but from the burden of what he'd hidden for over a decade. The dog's hind leg had a strange growth, hard and metallic looking, nothing like the tumors Elise had seen in her years as a veterinarian. Walter admitted he'd been hiding this from every vet for 10 years, too afraid of what they might say about his best friend. But when Elise examined it closely, she realized this wasn't a medical condition at all. The growth matched something from her late father's research notes classified. Documents about Project Meridian that she'd found after his funeral. Her father had worked on something involving animals and strange biological markers in the 1980s. What secret had Walter been protecting all these years, and how was it connected to her father's mysterious past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Cedar Falls Veterinary Clinic, casting long shadows across the examination room where Dr. Elise Monroe had spent the better part of her adult life. At 34, she had found a rhythm in this quiet mountain town that suited her temperament. Perfectly predictable days filled with routine checkups, vaccinations, and the occasional emergency that reminded her why she'd chosen this profession. In the first place, Cedar Falls had been her sanctuary for nearly a decade, ever since she'd fled the chaos of her residency in Denver and the painful memories that came with her father's sudden death. The town of 3,000 souls, nestled in the Colorado Rockies, offered exactly what she needed: distance from the past and a community that respected both her skills and her privacy. "Dr. Monroe, your 9 o'clock is here," Sarah Chun called. From the front desk, her voice carrying the familiar warmth that had made her indispensable over the past 5 years. Sarah had appeared in Cedar Falls shortly after Elise, claiming she needed a fresh start after college. Her efficiency and genuine care for the animals had quickly made her more than just an assistant. She'd become the closest thing Elise had to family. The morning appointments flowed with their usual predictability. Mrs. Patterson's ancient tabby needed his arthritis medication adjusted. The Hendersons' new puppy required his second round of shots. Old Tom Griffith brought in his prize rooster, convinced the bird had eaten something poisonous, though Elise suspected the rooster was simply getting too much attention from the hens. It was during lunch that Elise found herself drawn to the locked drawer in her office desk, the one that contained her father's research journal. Dr. Richard Monroe had been a brilliant scientist. That much she knew. He'd worked for various government contractors throughout her childhood, often disappearing for weeks at a time on projects he could never discuss. The leather-bound notebook had been tucked away in his study, discovered only after the funeral. When she'd finally worked up the courage to clean out his belongings, the journal's pages were filled with her father's careful handwriting, documenting something called Project Meridian. Most of the technical details were beyond her veterinary training, but certain phrases had haunted her since that first reading. Biological integration successful, neural pathway enhancement, ethical concerns mounting, and most disturbing of all, the animals know something is wrong. Her father had been working with animals, that much was clear. But the nature of the work remained frustratingly vague, hidden behind technical jargon and what appeared to be deliberate obfuscation. He'd written as if he knew someone might read these notes someday, someone who might not approve of what they found. The bell above the clinic door chimed, pulling Elise from her thoughts. She glanced at the appointment book, no one scheduled. Until 2 o'clock. Sarah's voice drifted from the front room, speaking in the gentle tones she reserved for nervous pet owners. "Of course, Mr. Brennan. Dr. Monroe will see you right away." Walter Brennan. The name wasn't familiar, though in a town this size, Elise knew most of the pet owners by sight, if not by name. She closed her father's journal and slipped it back into the drawer, turning the key with practiced discretion. When she stepped into the examination room, she found Walter Brennan cradling a large German shepherd with the tenderness of a man holding his own child. Walter was clearly in his 70s, his weathered face speaking of years spent outdoors, hands calloused from decades of work she couldn't identify. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, pale blue and deeply troubled, carrying the weight of someone who hadn't slept well in years. The German shepherd was magnificent despite his age. 13 years old, Walter had explained, though the dog carried himself with dignity. His coat was silver gray around the muzzle, and his intelligent brown eyes tracked Elise's every movement with the alertness of a much younger animal. "His name is Major," Walter said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I should have brought him in sooner, but—" He trailed off, his hands continuing to stroke the dog's head with infinite gentleness. "What seems to be the problem?" Elise asked, though she could already see it. The dog's right hind leg bore an unusual growth just above the ankle, a hardened mass that caught the light with an almost metallic sheen. "It's been there for years," Walter admitted, not meeting her eyes. "Maybe 10, 11 years now. Started small, but it's been growing. Lately, Major seems to be favoring that leg more." Elise knelt beside the examination table, her hands gentle as she began her assessment. Major allowed her touch without resistance, though she sensed a wariness in his posture. The growth was unlike anything in her experience, too regular in shape to be a typical tumor, too organic in appearance to be completely foreign. "Mr. Brennan, I have to ask, why didn't you bring Major in when this first appeared?" Early intervention is always preferable with growths like this. Walter's face crumpled slightly, and she saw him struggle with some internal battle. "I was afraid," he whispered finally. "Afraid of what you might say, afraid you might." He couldn't finish the sentence, but Elise understood. He was afraid she might recommend putting Major down. "I can see how much you love him," she said gently. "Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together. But I'm going to need to do some tests." As she prepared her instruments, Walter began to talk, not about the growth, but about Major himself. How he'd found the dog as a puppy, abandoned and half-starved near an old industrial site outside town. How Major had been his constant companion through retirement, through the loss of his wife 3 years ago, through the quiet loneliness that filled his days. "He's not just my dog," Walter said, his voice breaking slightly. "He's my family, my best friend, the only living thing that depends on me." Elise felt her chest tighten with sympathy. She'd seen this bond countless times, the deep connection between humans and their animal companions that transcended simple pet ownership. But there was something in Walter's voice, a desperation that suggested he was carrying more than just concern for his dog's health. Her initial examination confirmed her suspicions. The growth wasn't behaving like any tumor she'd encountered. It seemed to be integrated into the bone structure itself, almost as if it had been surgically implanted rather than developed naturally. The edges were too clean, the surface too uniform. "Mr. Brennan, I'm going to be honest with you. This growth is unusual. I'd like to take some x-rays and possibly do a biopsy, but I want you to know that I've never seen anything quite like this before." Walter nodded, but she caught the flash of panic in his eyes. "You won't hurt him, will you? I mean, if it's not bothering him too much." "The x-rays won't hurt at all," she assured him, "and we'll discuss any other procedures before we do them. I promise you, Major's comfort and well-being are my top priority." As she prepared the x-ray equipment, Elise found herself thinking about her father's journal again. The timing felt too coincidental. Walter's story about finding Major near an industrial site, the unusual nature of the growth, her father's mysterious research involving animals. Cedar Falls was a small town, and the only major industrial facility in the area had been the defunct Meridian research station shuddered. Sometime in the late 1980s, the X-rays revealed something that made Elise's breath catch in her throat. The growth wasn't just attached to the bone. It appeared to be networked throughout Major's leg, with hair-thin filaments that extended far beyond what was visible on the surface. More disturbing still, some of these filaments seemed to connect to Major's nervous system. Walter saw her expression and immediately tensed. "What is it? What did you find?" Elise studied the images again, her mind racing. This wasn't medical, this was technological. Someone had implanted something in this dog, and based on the bone development around it, it had been there for most of Major's life. "Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you found Major as a puppy, where exactly was that industrial site?" Walter's face went pale. His hands, which had been steady throughout the examination, began to tremble slightly. "Why do you ask?" "Because what I'm seeing in these X-rays isn't natural. Someone put this in Major, probably when he was very young. And based on the complexity of it, this wasn't done by some amateur. This required sophisticated equipment and expertise." The silence stretched between them, broken only by Major's quiet panting. Walter's internal struggle was visible on his face, the war between protecting his secret and protecting his beloved companion. "The old Meridian place," he finally whispered. "I found him there, near the main building. But Dr. Monroe, you have to understand, I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I was just trying to save him." Elise felt the world tilt slightly around her. Meridian, the same facility mentioned in her father's research notes. The same project that had kept him awake at night, writing worried observations about animals who knew something was wrong. "Mr. Brennan," she said carefully, "what do you know about Project Meridian?" The question hit Walter like a physical blow. He actually staggered, his hand gripping the examination table for support. Major whined softly, sensing his owner's distress. "How do you know that name?" Walter asked, his voice barely audible. Elise went to her office and returned with her father's journal. Walter's eyes widened as he saw the familiar logo embossed on the leather cover, the same logo that had been on the gates of the facility, where he'd found Major all those years ago. "My father worked there," Elise said simply. "Dr. Richard Monroe. He left this behind when he died, but most of it doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you can help fill in the blanks." Walter sank into the chair beside the examination table, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. Major moved closer, pressing his massive head against Walter's knee in a gesture of comfort that spoke of years of practice. "Your father was a good man," Walter said finally. "One of the few who questioned what they were doing. Most of us just followed orders, but Dr. Monroe, he tried to protect them. The animals, I mean. He tried to make them stop." "Stop what, exactly?" "The experiments. The implants. They were trying to create enhanced military working animals dogs that could track better, survive longer, communicate with their handlers over distances that shouldn't be possible. The technology worked, but the cost." He shook his head. "Sadly, the animals suffered. Your father documented everything, tried to blow the whistle, but the project had too much momentum, too much money behind it." Elise felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Her father's late nights, his increasing withdrawal during his final years, his refusal to talk about his work, it all made sense now. He'd been carrying the weight of what he'd witnessed, just like Walter had been carrying the weight of what he'd done. "And Major? Subject 47, Walter said quietly. That was his designation. I was working security when the facility shut down. Most of the animals were supposed to be. He couldn't say the word, but Elise understood. I couldn't let that happen. Not to any of them, but especially not to 47. He was just a puppy, maybe 3 months old, and he looked at me with those eyes. Walter's voice broke completely then. Major seemed to understand, pressing closer and offering the comfort that had sustained both of them through the years. I helped as many as I could escape during the chaos of the shutdown, Walter continued. Major was the last one I got out. I told myself I'd find a way to remove the implant later, but as the years went by and he seemed healthy and happy, I convinced myself it wasn't hurting him. I convinced myself it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. But now it's getting worse, Elise said, understanding. Walter nodded miserably. The past few months, he's been limping more. Sometimes he seems confused, like the signals in his head are getting mixed up. I knew I couldn't wait any longer, but I was terrified that bringing him to a vet would mean losing him. Elise looked at the x-rays again, her mind working through the implications. If Major was indeed Subject 47 from Project Meridian, and if her father's notes were accurate, then this implant represented technology that was decades ahead of its time, and potentially very dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. Mr. Brennan, Walter, I want to help Major, but I need to understand what we're dealing with here. Are there others? Other animals from the project? I don't know for certain, Walter said. I helped 6 animals escape, but I lost track of most of them over the years. Major's the only one I kept. He looked at her with desperate hope. Can you help him? Can you get that thing out of him without hurting him? Elise studied her father's journal again, flipping to pages she'd read dozens of times without understanding their significance. Now, with Walter's story providing context, phrases that had seemed like scientific gibberish began to make sense. Her father had been documenting not just the experiments, but potential ways to reverse them. I think my father might have left us a roadmap, she said slowly. But Walter, I have to be honest with you. If what you're telling me is true, if this technology is what I think it is, then we're not just dealing with a medical problem. We're dealing with something that certain people might kill to keep secret. Walter's face hardened with a resolve she hadn't seen before. Then they'll have to go through me first, he said simply. I've spent 13 years protecting this dog, and I'm not about to stop now. As if he understood the conversation, Major lifted his head and looked directly at Elise. His intelligent brown eyes seemed to be making a judgment about her trustworthiness. After a moment, he relaxed and laid his head back down on Walter's lap, a gesture of acceptance that felt like a sacred trust being placed in her hands. Elise closed her father's journal and made her decision. Then let's figure this out together. But we're going to need help, and we're going to need to be very careful about who we trust. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. Neither Elise nor Walter noticed the dark sedan that had been parked across from the clinic for the past hour, or the man inside it who lowered his binoculars and reached for his phone. The past that Walter had been running from for 13 years was finally catching up with him. And Dr. Elise Monroe, whether she knew it or not, had just stepped into the crosshairs of a conspiracy that had been waiting decades for exactly this moment. The next morning arrived with an urgency that Elise hadn't felt in years. She'd spent most of the night reading and rereading her father's journal, Walter's revelations casting new light on passages that had previously seemed like abstract scientific speculation. Now, armed with context, she could see the moral anguish bleeding through her father's careful documentation. She arrived at the clinic an hour early, her father's old equipment box clutched in her hands. She'd retrieved it from storage the night before, remembering how her father had insisted she keep his special tools after his funeral, claiming she might someday understand their importance. At the time, she thought it was just another example of his secretive nature. Now she suspected he'd been preparing for exactly this moment. Sarah looked up from her morning preparations, noting the intensity in Elise's expression. "You're here. Early. Everything all right? Walter Brennan is coming back this morning with Major. I need to run some additional tests." Elise set the equipment box on the examination table and began removing devices she hadn't seen in over a decade. "Sarah, what do you know about the old Meridian facility?" Something flickered across Sarah's face, too quick to identify, but enough to catch Elise's attention. "Not much. It closed before I moved here. Some kind of research station, right?" "Before." Elise could respond. The bell chimed and Walter entered with Major. The old man looked like he hadn't slept any better than she had, his eyes red-rimmed with worry. Major seemed subdued, his usual alertness dimmed by what appeared to be increasing discomfort. "How is he this morning?" Elise asked, immediately noting the way Major favored his right leg. "Worse," Walter said simply. "He had what looked like a seizure around 3 in the morning. Just a small one, but it scared me. I think that thing in his leg is affecting more than just his mobility." Elise felt her chest tighten. Her father's notes had mentioned neurological complications in the test subjects, symptoms that appeared when the implants began to malfunction or deteriorate. She lifted a handheld device from her father's equipment box, something that looked like a cross between a metal detector and a medical scanner. "Walter, I found this in my father's things. I think it might be able to tell us more about what we're dealing with." The device was unlike anything in her veterinary training. When she powered it on, it emitted a soft humming sound and displayed a complex readout on its small screen. She held it over Major's leg, watching as the display suddenly came alive with data streams and warning indicators. The readings were unmistakable. The growth wasn't just a foreign object. It was an active piece of technology, still transmitting and receiving signals after more than a decade. The neural integration was far more extensive than the X-rays had suggested, with microscopic filaments extending throughout Major's nervous system. "Walter," she said quietly, "this isn't just an implant. It's a complete biological integration system, and it's still active." Walter's face went ashen. "Active? You mean it's still doing whatever they designed it to do? More than that. According to this scanner, it's been collecting and storing data all these years. Biological data, environmental data, behavioral patterns, everything." She looked up from the device, her expression grim. "Major isn't just a victim of this experiment, Walter. He's been an unwitting spy for 13 years. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Walter sank into the chair beside the examination table, his hand shaking as the full implications hit him. All those walks through town, all those visits to neighbors, all those times he was just being a friendly dog. He was recording everything. Elise finished. "The question is, who's been receiving that data?" Before Walter could answer, Sarah appeared in the doorway with an expression of barely contained alarm. "Dr. Monroe, there are 3 men outside asking about a German Shepherd. They say they're from animal control, but they're driving an unmarked van, and they don't look like any animal control officers I've ever seen." Elise felt ice form in her stomach. She moved to the window and peered through the blinds. 3 men in dark suits stood beside a black van, their posture and bearing clearly military or law enforcement. One of them was speaking into a radio, while scanning the area with practiced efficiency. "How long have they been out there?" she asked. "They just pulled up, but Dr. Monroe, there's something else. I ran the license plate. The van is registered to a company called Meridian Solutions." Walter made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. "They found us," he whispered. "After all these years, they finally found us." Elise's mind raced through options. The clinic had a back entrance that led to the alley behind the building, but it would only be a matter of time before these men, whoever they were, decided to stop asking politely and start demanding answers. "Sarah, is there another way out of here?" "The basement connects to the old storm drain system. It comes up 3 blocks away near the library." Sarah's response was immediate and precise, as if she'd planned for exactly this scenario. There was No time to wonder how Sarah knew about escape routes. Elise grabbed her father's scanner and journal, while Walter scooped Major into his arms with surprising strength. The dog seemed to understand the urgency, remaining calm despite his obvious discomfort. They made it to the basement just as the bell chimed upstairs, indicating that someone had entered the clinic. Sarah led them through a maze of storage areas and maintenance tunnels, her familiarity with the route raising questions that would have to wait for later. The storm drain was exactly as Sarah had described, a concrete tunnel large enough for them to move through in a crouch. The sound of their movement echoed unnervingly in the enclosed space, but it was better than facing whatever those men wanted. They emerged near the library, dirty and shaken, but undetected. Walter's truck was parked 2 blocks away, and they managed to reach it without encountering any more mysterious visitors. As they drove through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that their small town had suddenly become very dangerous. "Where can we go?" she asked Walter. "Somewhere safe where we can figure out what to do next." "I know a place," Walter said, his jaw set with determination. "But first, I need to tell you something. I wasn't entirely truthful yesterday about my role at Meridian." Elise felt another piece of the puzzle shift. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't just security. I was part of the team that helped develop the integration process. I know these systems better than almost anyone alive, which is why I was able to help the animals escape. But it also means I know how dangerous this technology really is." The scanner in Elise's lap continued to emit readings from Major, painting a picture of biological and technological integration that was both fascinating and terrifying. The neural pathways weren't just being monitored. They were being influenced, guided, potentially controlled. "Walter, if this technology fell into the wrong hands, it could be used to control animals, or worse, to develop systems that could influence human behavior. The applications for surveillance, for warfare, for population control." He shook his head grimly. "Your father understood that. It's why he tried to stop the project from the inside." They drove in silence for several minutes, each lost in the implications of what they'd discovered. Major lay across the back seat, his breathing labored but steady. The device continued to show his vital signs along with the constant flow of data being transmitted by the implant. "There's something else," Walter said finally. "The scanner your father built, it's not just a diagnostic tool. According to the original specifications, it was designed to safely deactivate the implants." Elise looked down at the device in her hands. "You mean this could actually remove the technology from Major?" "Theoretically. But the process was never tested on a subject who'd had the implant for so long. The integration is so complete now that removing it could kill him or leave him with severe neurological damage." The impossible choice loomed before them: leave Major with the implant and risk whatever those men in black suits had planned, or attempt to remove it and potentially lose him in the process. Either path was fraught with danger, but the decision had become more urgent with each passing hour. "How much time do we have?" Elise asked. Walter checked the device readings again. "Based on the deterioration patterns, maybe days before the implant causes permanent damage. Maybe less." As they turned onto a dirt road leading into the mountains, Elise realized that their quiet life in Cedar Falls was over. Whatever her father had been involved in 30 years ago had finally come home, and now she and Walter were the only ones standing between Major and the people who saw him not as a beloved companion, but as a piece of military hardware that needed to be recovered or eliminated. The road ahead disappeared into the forest, taking them toward answers that neither of them was prepared to face, but that they had no choice but to confront. Behind them, the town that had been their sanctuary was no longer safe, and ahead lay a reckoning with secrets that had been buried for far too long. Walter's safe house turned out to be a modest cabin tucked deep in a national forest, accessible only by a logging road that had seen better decades. The structure was simple but well-maintained, with solar panels on the roof and what appeared to be sophisticated communication equipment visible through the windows. Clearly, Walter had been preparing for this day longer than he'd initially admitted. "I built this place after I retired," Walter explained as he helped Major from the truck. "Figured if the past ever caught up with me, I'd need somewhere to disappear for a while." Inside, the cabin revealed the organized mind of someone who'd spent years planning for multiple contingencies. Maps of the region covered one wall, marked with escape routes and supply caches. A gun safe stood in the corner, and shelves lined with technical manuals suggested. Walter's expertise went far beyond simple security work. Elise made Major comfortable on a thick rug near the fireplace while Walter activated what appeared to be a signal jamming device. "That should keep us invisible to most tracking systems," he said. At least for a while. Sarah had remained unusually quiet during the drive, her earlier efficiency in guiding their escape raising questions that Elise couldn't ignore. "Sarah, how did you know about those tunnels? And why did you know exactly how to check that license plate?" Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "I've been in Cedar Falls longer than I told you. I moved there specifically to keep an eye on things, to watch for signs that Meridian survivors might surface." "Your government," Walter said. It wasn't a question. It was government. "I work for a private oversight committee, now people who believe. The public has a right to know what happened at facilities like Meridian." Sarah looked between them. "When I took the job at your clinic, Elise, it was supposed to be routine surveillance. We had no idea you were Dr. Monroe's daughter until you started asking questions about the old facility." Elise felt the betrayal like a physical blow. "So our friendship, everything we've built over 5 years, started as an assignment," Sarah admitted. "But it became real. You have to believe that. When I saw those men outside the clinic, I had to choose between my job and protecting you. I chose you." Walter moved to a filing cabinet and withdrew a large folder thick with documents. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is that they found us, which means they've been tracking either Major's implant or something else." He spread papers across the dining table, architectural blueprints that made Elise's breath catch. The documents showed the Meridian facility in intricate detail, including extensive underground levels that had never appeared on any public records. The scale was staggering. What looked from the outside like a modest research station was revealed as a massive complex extending deep into the mountain. "These are the original blueprints," Walter said. "I kept copies when the facility shut down. Figured they might be useful someday." The public demolition only touched the surface buildings. Everything important was left intact underground. Elise studied the diagrams, noting areas marked as containment cells, surgical suites, and something labeled as neural integration labs. The facility had been designed not just for research, but for large-scale production of enhanced animals. "How many subjects were there?" she asked. "Over 200 across multiple species. Dogs were just the beginning. They had programs for cats, dolphins, even some work with primates." Walter's voice carried the weight of old guilt. "Most of the animals didn't survive the integration process. The ones that did well, Major and the 5 others I helped escape, were among the last batch, the ones where they'd finally perfected the technology." Sarah leaned over the blueprints, her finger tracing corridors and chambers. "My committee has been trying to access this facility for years, but it's still classified at the highest levels. Even after 3 decades, the government claims national security concerns." "That's because the technology worked too well," Walter said grimly. The neural integration wasn't just about creating better military animals. It was proof of concept for human enhancement. Everything they learned from subjects like Major was supposed to be applied to soldiers, to intelligence operatives, to anyone the military wanted to upgrade. The scanner continued to monitor Major from across the room, its readings showing the complex interplay between biological and artificial systems that had become his reality. Elise watched the data streams and felt a growing certainty that time was running out for all of them. The people who came to the clinic, are they government or private sector? Could be either, Walter replied. After Meridian officially shut down, the technology and research were sold to private defense contractors. Companies like Meridian Solutions have been trying to reverse engineer and improve on the original work ever since. He pulled out another set of documents, these ones showing corporate structures and government contracts. The problem is that Major isn't just evidence of what they did 30 years ago. He's a working prototype that's been field testing their systems for over a decade. The data stored in his implant is worth millions, maybe billions, to the right buyer. Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Her face paled as she read it. We have a problem. My committee's intelligence network shows unusual activity at several military installations. Someone's mobilizing resources for a recovery operation. How long do we have? Elise asked. Hours, maybe less. They're treating this as a matter of national security now. Sarah looked at Major, who had lifted his head at the tension in their voices. I'm sorry, but there's something else you need to know. Major isn't the only surviving subject they're after. Walter's head snapped up. What do you mean? My committee has been tracking anomalies in small towns across the country for the past year. That behavior that doesn't match normal patterns. Veterinary records that show unusual physiological markers. Reports of animals displaying enhanced capabilities. Sarah pulled up files on her tablet. We think at least 20 of the Meridian subjects are still alive, scattered across rural communities where they've been living as family pets. The implications hit Elise like a wave. They're all in danger. Worse than that, if Meridian Solutions or whoever's behind this gets their hands on enough of the subjects, they'll have decades of real-world data on how the technology performs in uncontrolled environments. They'll be able to perfect the integration process and apply it to new subjects, including humans. Walter moved to the window, scanning the forest with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years watching for threats. The question is, what do we do about it? We can't protect 20 animals spread across the country, and we can barely protect Major. Elise looked at her father's scanner, his display continuing to show the intricate web of technology woven through Major's nervous system. Maybe we don't have to protect them all. Maybe we just have to make sure the data they want can't be used. What do you mean? My father's scanner, Walter, said it was designed to safely deactivate the implants. What if we could use it to wipe the stored data before anyone can access it? Not just from Major, but from all the surviving subjects. Sarah and Walter exchanged glances. That would require getting close enough to each animal to run the deactivation sequence, Sarah said slowly. And we'd need to find them first. Plus, Walter added, there's no guarantee the deactivation process won't kill them. Your father never had a chance to test it on long-term subjects. Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley, still distant, but growing closer. Their time for planning had just run out. Major struggled to his feet, his intelligence evident in the way he moved toward the door, every instinct telling him that danger was approaching. Whatever decision they made, it had to be now. The helicopter sounds forced them into immediate action. Walter moved with military precision, gathering essential supplies, while Sarah worked frantically on her encrypted communications. Elise focused on Major, whose condition seemed to be deteriorating under the stress of constant movement. There's another cabin about 5 miles north, Walter said, shouldering a pack of supplies. But we need to move now, before they establish a perimeter. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent message. Her face went white as she read it. Walter, I'm getting reports from other locations. They're not just looking. For major teams are moving on suspected Meridian subjects all across the country. How is that possible? Elise asked, helping Major to his feet. How do they know where to look? Walter stopped gathering supplies, his face grim with understanding. Because they've been tracking the implants all along. I thought the signals were passive, just collecting data. But if they've been transmitting location information, they've known where every surviving subject was located for years. Sarah finished. They were just waiting for the right moment to collect them all at once. The sound of vehicles on the logging road confirmed their worst fears. Through the window, Elise could see dust clouds rising through the trees, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Walter moved to a wall panel and withdrew a folder thick with photographs and documents. These are the Project Meridian test subject files, he said, handing them to Elise. Every animal that survived the initial integration process, including detailed photos from when they were puppies. He pointed to a photograph of a young German shepherd with distinctive markings around his eyes. Subject 47 Major. Elise stared at the photograph, seeing her beloved patient as he'd been more than a decade ago, surrounded by scientific equipment and clinical notations. The innocence in those young eyes contrasted with the cold technical language describing neural pathway mapping and behavioral modification protocols made her stomach turn. There are 5 other files here, she said, flipping through the documents. Other animals you helped escape. Subject 23, a border collie mix, integrated at 6 months old. Subject 31, a German shepherd, like Major. Subject 52, a Malinois. Subject 67, a husky mix. And Subject 78, another German shepherd. Walter's voice carried the weight of memory as he recited each animal. I lost track of most of them over the years, but according to these files, they would have been incredibly intelligent, probably displaying behaviors that their adoptive families attributed to exceptional training rather than technological enhancement. Sarah was monitoring multiple data streams on her tablet. My committee's tracking software shows coordinated operations in Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado. They're moving on at least 6 locations simultaneously. They're collecting them all, Elise realized. Every surviving subject, all at once. The first vehicle came into view, a black SUV, followed by 2 more identical vehicles and a military-style transport truck. Armed figures in tactical gear were already dismounting before the vehicles had come to a complete stop. Back door now, Walter commanded, leading them through the cabin's rear exit. Major moved slowly but steadily, his training and intelligence evident in how quietly he navigated the forest floor despite his discomfort. They made it perhaps 100 yards into the trees before the cabin's front door was breached. Shouts and the sound of equipment being moved told them their pursuers were conducting a thorough search, but it also gave them precious time to increase their distance. The forest provided good cover, but Walter knew it wouldn't hide them for long. They'll have thermal imaging and tracking dogs, he said as they moved through the underbrush. Our only advantage is that I know this terrain better than they do. 20 minutes of careful movement brought them to what appeared to be an old mine shaft, its entrance partially concealed by decades of overgrowth. Walter led them inside to a chamber that had been converted into an emergency shelter, complete with supplies and communication equipment. This is where I've been preparing to make my last stand for the past 5 years, he said, activating a generator that powered lights and electronics. But I never thought I'd have to protect anyone. But Major. Sarah immediately began working with the communication equipment, trying to contact her oversight committee. I'm getting reports that the operations are succeeding, she said grimly. They've recovered at least 3 subjects so far, and they're closing in on the others. Elise examined the test subject files more closely, studying the integration procedures and long-term monitoring protocols. Walter, according to these documents, The implants weren't just designed to enhance the animals. They were designed to eventually upload the collected data to a central system. What kind of data? Everything. Sensory input, behavioral patterns, environmental mapping, human interaction analysis, 13 years' worth of detailed intelligence gathering. She looked up from the files. These animals haven't just been pets. They've been living surveillance systems, mapping the communities they lived in, analyzing the people they interacted with, documenting patterns of daily life in small town America. The implications were staggering. If someone wanted to understand how to infiltrate, influence, or control rural American communities, the data stored in subjects like Major would be invaluable. Population centers, daily routines, social structures, emergency response capabilities, all documented from the perspective of trusted, family pets who had access to every aspect of their owners' lives. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. "The operations aren't being conducted by government agencies. The tactical teams are all private contractors, which means someone with serious resources and no official oversight is behind this." Walter moved to a weapons cache and began checking equipment. "Then, we're not just dealing with a recovery operation. We're dealing with someone who wants this technology for their own purposes." Through the mine shaft's entrance, they could hear the distant sound of search teams moving through the forest. Dogs were barking, their handlers directing them in a systematic sweep pattern that would eventually lead to their hiding place. "How long before they find us?" Elise asked. "Maybe an hour if we're lucky," Walter replied. "But there's something I haven't told you. The deactivation sequence your father designed. It's not just for individual implants. According to the original specifications, it can send a cascade signal that would deactivate every implant within a 50-mile radius." Sarah looked up from her communications equipment. "You mean we could shut down multiple subjects at once?" "In theory. But the power requirements would be enormous, and there's no way to know if the process would kill the animals or just disable the implants." Walter's expression was grim. It would be like performing surgery on Major and every other surviving subject simultaneously, without any way to monitor their individual responses. Elise stared at the scanner her father had created, understanding for the first time the terrible choice he had been preparing for. Save the animals and risk killing them, or let them live as unwitting tools of surveillance and control. Major lifted his head and looked directly at her, his intelligent eyes seeming to understand the weight of the decision that lay ahead. In that moment, she realized that whatever choice they made would define not just Major's fate, but the fate of every surviving Meridian subject and possibly the future of human-animal relationships in an age of technological integration. The sound of approaching search teams grew closer as Walter led them deeper into the mine shaft complex. The tunnels branched in multiple directions, remnants of a copper mining operation that had closed decades before the Meridian facility was even built. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the rock walls, and their footsteps echoed in the confined space despite their attempts at stealth. "This connects to a whole network of abandoned mines," Walter explained, consulting a hand-drawn map. "Some of them come out miles from here, but we need to be careful. Not all the tunnels are stable." Sarah's tablet showed that the tactical teams had found the cabin and were beginning to expand their search pattern. "They're bringing in more resources," she reported. "Thermal drones, ground-penetrating radar. They're not taking any chances." Major was struggling with the uneven terrain, his implant-affected leg making it difficult to navigate the rocky passages. Elise could see his breathing becoming more labored, and the scanner showed increasing instability in his neural patterns. Whatever was happening with his implant was accelerating under stress. They reached a wider chamber that Walter had converted into a communication center. Banks of equipment lined the walls, including what appeared to be a powerful transmitter array. "I've been monitoring Meridian-related communications for years," he explained, trying to stay ahead of anyone who might come looking. As he powered up the systems, intercepted communications began filtering through the speakers. The voices were professional, clinical people coordinating a complex operation with military precision. Subject 23 secured. Minimal resistance from civilian family. Subject 52 required sedation. Displaying enhanced aggressive responses. Transport teams en route to consolidation point. Alpha. Each transmission represented another. Family losing a beloved pet. Another piece of the Project Meridian conspiracy being assembled by people who saw these animals as nothing more than recovered equipment. Elise felt sick listening to the cold efficiency with which lives were being disrupted. "We need to contact Dr. Catherine Voss," Walter said suddenly, his fingers flying over a keyboard. "If anyone's still alive who might know how to safely deactivate these implants, it's her." "Who's Dr. Voss?" Sarah asked. "She was your father's research partner," Walter told Elise. "The co-developer of the integration technology, but also the one who first raised ethical concerns about the project. When Meridian shut down, she disappeared. I always assumed she'd been silenced or relocated. The communication equipment locked onto an encrypted signal, and after several minutes of Walter's technical wizardry, a grainy video connection established itself. The face that appeared on the screen was that of a woman in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes that held the same haunted quality Elise had seen in Walter's. "Walter Brennan," Dr. Voss said, her voice carrying decades of weariness. "I wondered if this day would ever come. Catherine, they're collecting the survivors, all of them simultaneously." Walter's voice was urgent. "We have Dr. Monroe's daughter here. She has Richard's deactivation device." Dr. Voss's attention shifted to Elise, and she saw something like recognition in the older woman's eyes. "You look like your father. He was a good man, caught in an impossible situation." Her expression hardened. "But if they're collecting the subjects now, it means someone has figured out how to mass extract the accumulated data." "What kind of data are we talking about?" Elise asked. Dr. Voss activated what appeared to be her own scanner, displaying complex data patterns. 13 years of continuous surveillance from the perspective of trusted family pets. Social mapping, behavioral analysis, infrastructure assessment, emergency response protocols, everything someone would need to understand and potentially manipulate rural American communities. The encrypted hard drive that Dr. Voss accessed showed video logs from the final days of Project Meridian. Elise watched her father on the small screen, looking younger but already carrying the weight of moral conflict that would define his remaining years. The integration process was more successful than we ever imagined, her father's recorded voice explained to the camera. The animals not only survived the neural enhancement, they thrived. Their intelligence increased exponentially, their sensory capabilities expanded beyond normal biological limits, and most importantly, their capacity for emotional bonding with humans remained intact. The video shifted to laboratory footage showing young animals, including a puppy that was clearly major undergoing various tests. The clinical environment couldn't hide the obvious distress of the subjects, and Elise saw her father's growing discomfort with each procedure. "The problem," her father continued in a later log entry, "is that the success has attracted the wrong kind of attention. Military applications are being discussed, human trials are being proposed, and the ethical oversight committee has been dissolved. We're creating something that could fundamentally alter the relationship between humans and animals, and we're doing it in service of people who see only weapons and surveillance tools." Dr. Voss paused the video. "Your father created the deactivation protocol because he knew this day would come. He suspected that someday someone would try to collect all the surviving subjects and extract their accumulated intelligence." "Can the protocol actually work?" Elise asked, looking at the scanner her father had built. In theory, yes. But the integration has been active for over a decade. The neural pathways have adapted, evolved, become dependent on the technological enhancement. Deactivating the implants could cause massive neurological trauma, potentially fatal seizures, or complete personality disintegration. Through the mine shaft's communication system, they could hear the search teams getting closer. Dog handlers were now working the area, and thermal imaging was beginning to map the underground spaces. "We don't have much time," Walter said. "Catherine, is there a way to safely extract the animal's memories and personalities before deactivating the implants?" Dr. Voss consulted her data. "Your father was working on exactly a way to preserve the enhanced intelligence and emotional development while removing the surveillance and control systems, but the process was never tested." Sarah looked up from monitoring the tactical communications. "They're about to breach our perimeter. Whatever we're going to do, it has to be now." Major struggled to his feet and moved to Elise's side, his eyes fixed on the scanner in her hands. In that moment, she realized that he understood more than any of them had imagined. The enhanced intelligence wasn't just about processing power in. It was about awareness, consciousness, the ability to comprehend his own situation and make choices about his fate. "He knows," she whispered. "Major knows what the device is, what it could do to him." Dr. Voss leaned closer to her camera. "The animals have always known more than we gave them credit for. The question is, are we brave enough to ask them what they want?" Outside their hidden shelter, the sound of equipment being positioned and orders being given indicated that their refuge was about to be discovered. The choice between risking Major's life to free him from his technological burden or allowing him to be captured and used as a tool by people with unknown intentions could no longer be avoided. The scanner in Elise's hands hummed with potential energy, her father's final gift carrying both the promise of freedom and the risk of loss that defined every meaningful choice in life. The tactical teams had found the mine entrance. Through the communication intercepts, Elise could hear orders being given for a systematic search of the underground complex. They had perhaps minutes before being discovered, but Dr. Voss was frantically working at her remote location, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. "I'm uploading everything to your father's scanner," she said urgently. "The deactivation protocols, the safety parameters, and something Richard hid in the code that I've only just discovered." The scanner in Elise's hand suddenly became warm, its display showing a rapid download of complex data streams. New menus appeared, options that hadn't been visible before, and what looked like an entirely separate program her father had embedded in the device. "What is it?" Elise asked, watching the progress indicators climb toward completion. "A preservation protocol. Your father found a way to maintain the enhanced cognitive abilities and emotional development while removing only the surveillance and control elements." Dr. Voss's voice carried a mixture of hope and desperation. "It's untested, but it might allow the animals to keep everything that makes them special while freeing them from their unwilling service as intelligence gatherers." Walter was monitoring the tactical communications while Sarah worked to encrypt and transmit their location to her oversight committee. "They're mapping the tunnel system with ground-penetrating radar," he reported. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they pinpoint this chamber." Major had positioned himself directly in front of Elise, his intelligent eyes fixed on the scanner. There was something in his posture, a readiness, an acceptance that suggested he understood what was about to happen and had made his own decision about it. "The other subjects," Elise said suddenly. "If we activate this protocol here, will it affect them too?" Dr. Voss consulted her data. "The cascade effect your father designed would reach any Meridian implant within approximately 50 miles. But Elise, you need to understand, we're essentially performing experimental surgery on multiple subjects simultaneously, with no way to monitor individual responses or provide medical support if something goes wrong. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. Not just Major's life, but potentially the lives of other enhanced animals scattered across the region, all dependent on a single decision made in a mine shaft while being hunted by people. With unknown motives, Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent message. My committee is reporting that the collected subjects are being transported to a facility in Nevada. If they reach that destination, we'll never see them again, and the data they've accumulated will be beyond our reach. How many have they captured? Walter asked. 4 confirmed, possibly 5. That leaves subject 47 Major, and maybe 1 or 2 others still unaccounted for. Elise looked at her father's scanner, now fully loaded with Dr. Voss's data and her father's hidden protocols. The device had transformed from a simple diagnostic tool into something that could potentially rewrite the fundamental nature of human-animal relationships. The enhanced animals represented the next step in interspecies communication and cooperation, but they also represented a surveillance network of unprecedented scope and intimacy. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Voss said, her image flickering as the connection became less stable. The people collecting these animals, they're not government agents. My sources indicate they're working for a consortium of private, military contractors who want to reverse engineer the technology for human application. Human application? Elise felt ice forming in her stomach. Neural enhancement, behavioral, modification, sensory augmentation, everything they perfected on the animals. Applied to soldiers, intelligence operatives, even civilian populations. The data from 13 years of successful animal subjects would allow them to skip decades of human trials and go directly to implementation. The sound of boots in the main tunnel was getting closer. Walter moved to the chamber entrance and activated what appeared to be a security system, motion sensors, and defensive measures he'd installed during his years of preparation. That might slow them down, he said, but not for long. Dr. Voss leaned closer to her camera, her expression urgent. Elise, your father's final video log contained a message specifically for you. He suspected that someday you might face this choice. A new window opened on the scanner's display, showing her father in what she recognized as his study at home. He looked older, wearier, but his eyes held the same gentle wisdom she remembered from childhood. My dear Elise, her father's recorded voice said, if you're seeing this, it means the day I've been dreading has finally arrived. The Meridian subjects have been discovered, and you're facing the same impossible choice that haunted me for the last years of my life. Tears blurred her vision as she watched her father struggle with words that he'd never been able to say in life. I want you to know that everything I did, every protocol I developed, every safeguard I built into this device was done with love. Love for the animals who trusted us with their lives. Love for the families who gave them homes. And love for you, because I knew that your compassion and your skills would make you the right person to finish what we started. The master control key appeared in her father's hands on the video, a small device that she now recognized had been hidden in her childhood music box, disguised as part of the mechanism that played her favorite lullaby. The choice is yours to make, her father continued. But remember, the true freedom sometimes requires great risk, and that the animals we enhanced were always more than just subjects in an experiment. They were partners in exploring what it means to bridge the gap between species. Through the mine shaft, the sound of Walter's defensive measures being triggered echoed through the tunnels. Shouts and the noise of equipment being deployed indicated that the tactical teams had encountered resistance. But it would only buy them minutes. Major moved closer to Elise and gently placed his paw on the scanner, the gesture unmistakably deliberate. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw not just intelligence, but wisdom, the accumulated understanding of an animal who had spent 13 years observing human nature from a unique perspective. He's ready, she whispered, understanding. That major had been preparing for this moment as long as Walter had. Sarah looked up from her communications equipment. The Oversight Committee is mobilizing resources, but they won't reach us in time. Whatever we're going to do. The lights in the chamber suddenly went out as Walter's power systems were compromised. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls, and the sound of approaching footsteps indicated that their hiding place had been breached. In the crimson darkness, Elise's father's scanner glowed with potential energy, the master control key, warm in her other hand, while Major waited with the patience of an animal who had finally found humans willing to respect his choice about his own fate. The sound of tactical boots on stone grew closer as Walter frantically worked to restore power to the chamber's defenses. In the emergency lighting, Elise could see Sarah's face illuminated by her tablet screen. Her expression strange, not fearful, but conflicted in a way that sent alarm bells through Elise's mind. "Sarah," Elise said quietly, "you need to help us get out of here." Sarah looked up from her device, and in that moment, Elise saw something that made her blood run cold. Sarah wasn't monitoring the tactical team's communications. She was coordinating with them. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so very sorry, but you don't understand the whole situation." Walter spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "You're working with them." "No," Sarah said quickly, raising her hands. "Not with them, but not exactly against them either." She reached into her jacket and withdrew a badge, not the government oversight identification she'd claimed, but something else entirely. A Meridian employee badge, old and worn, with a photograph that showed a much younger Sarah Chun. "My name isn't Sarah Chun," she said, her voice breaking. "It's Sarah Brennan." The silence that followed was deafening. Walter stared at the badge, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, impossible hope. "Sarah Brennan died 30 years ago," Walter whispered. "She was my daughter. She was 3 years old when you gave me up for adoption to protect me from the people who wanted to use you." Sarah finished. "I know, Dad. I've known for years." The world seemed to tilt around Elise as the implications crashed over her. Sarah hadn't been assigned to monitor the clinic by some oversight committee. She'd been searching for her father for decades, following the trail of the Meridian conspiracy that had torn their family apart. "The oversight committee?" Elise asked. "Real, but not what I told you. I've been working with former Meridian employees and their families, people who've been trying to expose the truth and protect the survivors." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she looked at Walter. "I've been watching over you and Major for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to make contact." Walter seemed to age a decade in seconds. "I thought you were dead. When they shut down the project, when the threats started coming, I had to make sure you were safe. I couldn't let them use you to get to me. I know." Sarah moved closer, her hand reaching toward the father she hadn't seen since childhood. "But Dad, they're not here to hurt us. The tactical team, they're the good guys." Through the mine shaft, the sound of movement had stopped. Instead of boots and equipment, Elise could hear voices calling out in a tone that sounded more like negotiation than assault. "Mr. Brennan, Dr. Monroe, we're here to help. We know about Major, and we know about the other subjects. We want to work with you, not against you." Sarah activated her tablet, and suddenly the mind chamber was filled with new voices, not tactical communications, but conference calls with people scattered across the country. Veterinarians, pet owners, and former Meridian employees, all connected through Sarah's network. "The recovery operations you've been monitoring," Sarah explained. "They were us. We've been collecting the surviving subjects not to exploit them, but to protect them. The real threat is Meridian Solutions, the defense contractors who want to weaponize the technology." On the tablet screen, Elise could see real-time footage from other locations. The captured animals weren't in cages or laboratories. They were in comfortable veterinary facilities, being cared for by people who clearly understood their enhanced nature. Subject 23 is with a family in Montana who've known about his implant for years, one voice reported. They were relieved when we made contact. They've been terrified that someone would take him away. Subject 52's adoptive family helped us with the recovery. The dog actually seemed to understand what was happening and cooperated with the transport. Walter sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation that his decades of hiding and preparation had been unnecessary. That there were people working to protect what he'd spent his life defending. The real Meridian Solutions has been tracking the subject's transmissions, Sarah continued. They know where every surviving animal is located, and they're planning a simultaneous collection operation within days. We had to move first, or lose everything. Dr. Voss's face reappeared on the communication screen. Sarah's network reached out to me 6 months ago. We've been coordinating the protection operation ever since, but we needed to find Walter and Major before Meridian Solutions did. So the deactivation protocol, Elise began. Still necessary, Dr. Voss confirmed. The implants are the source of the tracking signals. As long as they're active, every surviving subject is vulnerable. But now we can perform the procedure under controlled conditions with full veterinary support. Major had been listening to the entire conversation with the intelligence that still amazed Elise. Now he moved to Sarah, his father's long-lost daughter, and gently pressed his head against her hand. The gesture was unmistakably one of acceptance and welcome. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice steady now that the truth was out. "The data stored in the implants isn't just surveillance information. The animals have been recording something else, evidence of their own enhanced consciousness, their emotional development, their capacity for complex thought and decision-making." She activated another display, showing brain scan data from multiple subjects. They've been documenting their own evolution, proving that the neural enhancement created genuine artificial intelligence integrated with biological consciousness. This isn't just about creating better working animals. It's proof that we can successfully bridge the gap between organic and artificial intelligence, which is exactly why Meridian Solutions wants them, Walter said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Not for military applications, but for the AI integration technology. Corporate espionage on a massive scale, Sarah confirmed. They want to reverse engineer consciousness itself. Through the mine entrance, new figures were approaching, but these were clearly medical personnel, not tactical operatives. They carried veterinary equipment and moved with the careful consideration of people who understood they were dealing with extraordinary patients. "Dr. Monroe," one of them called. "We've been hoping to work with you. Your father's research is legendary in our field, and we understand you have his deactivation protocols." Elise looked at the scanner in her hands, realizing that her father's work had been known and respected by a community of people she'd never imagined existed: veterinarians, researchers, and animal advocates who had been working in secret to protect the Meridian survivors for decades. "The choice is still yours to make," Dr. Voss said from the screen. "We can attempt the deactivation here under emergency conditions, or we can transport Major to a full surgical facility where we can monitor every aspect of the procedure." Sarah, her real name finally spoken aloud, looked between her father and the dog who had been his constant companion through decades of exile. "Dad, what do you want to do?" Walter studied Major's face, seeing the intelligence and awareness. That had made their relationship so much more than simple pet ownership. "I think," he said slowly, "that after 13 years of making decisions for him, it's time we ask Major what he wants." The enhanced German Shepherd looked around the chamber at the assembled faces, people who had risked everything to protect animals like him, family members reunited after decades of separation. and researchers dedicated to ensuring that consciousness, whether natural or enhanced, was treated with dignity and respect. Major walked to the scanner in Elise's hands and, once again, placed his paw on the device. But this time, his gesture was clearly a choice made with full understanding of the consequences, a decision by a conscious being about his own fate, made in the presence of humans who finally understood that intelligence, whether born or made, deserved the right to choose its own path. The mind chamber fell silent as everyone present recognized they were witnessing something unprecedented. An artificially enhanced animal making an informed decision about medical treatment, surrounded by humans who were finally ready to listen to what he had to say. The reunion between Walter and Sarah, father and daughter separated by decades of fear and secrecy, provided a moment of profound healing in the midst of crisis. But even as they embraced, the urgency of their situation pressed forward. Major's implant was showing increasing signs of instability, and across the country, other surviving subjects remained vulnerable to capture by Meridian Solutions. Dr. Catherine Voss had made the journey from her remote location, arriving at the mine with a full mobile veterinary surgical unit. The sophistication of the equipment spoke to years of preparation and significant financial backing from their network of protectors. As she set up the monitoring systems, she explained the complexity of what they were about to attempt. The deactivation protocol your father designed requires us to essentially perform neurosurgery while the implant is still active, she told Elise. We have to map the neural pathways that have developed around the technology, preserve the enhanced cognitive functions, and safely extract the surveillance and control elements, all while maintaining Major's consciousness throughout the procedure. Walter had produced what appeared to be a small electronic device from his emergency supplies, something he'd kept hidden even from himself for 30 years. The Meridian facility emergency lockdown codes, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. I memorized them when I helped the animals escape, thinking they might someday be useful. I never imagined I'd actually need them. Sarah looked at the codes, cross-referencing them with data on her tablet. Dad, according to our intelligence, the original Meridian facility is still partially operational. The underground laboratories were never decommissioned. They're being maintained by Meridian Solutions as a research site. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. If the facility was still active, it meant that not only had the technology never been abandoned, but it had likely been improved, refined, and prepared for broader application. The surviving subjects weren't just evidence of past experiments, they were proof of concept for current operations. How many subjects are still unaccounted for? Dr. Voss asked as she calibrated her equipment. Besides Major, we think there are 2 others still at large, Sarah replied. But Meridian Solutions has teams closing in on their locations. We have maybe hours before they're all captured. The mobile surgical unit was impressive, a completely self-contained operating theater with monitoring equipment that could track every aspect of Major's biological and technological systems during the procedure. But even with all this preparation, the risks were enormous. There's something else, Walter said, his fingers running over the lockdown codes. These aren't just access codes, they're master override commands. If we could get to the original Meridian facility, we could potentially use them to shut down the entire network simultaneously. What network? Elise asked. Every implant ever created, Dr. Voss explained. The Meridian system was designed with centralized control capabilities. In theory, the right commands entered at the source facility could deactivate every implant that was ever manufactured, regardless of its current location. Sarah pulled up satellite imagery of the Meridian facility on her tablet. The surface buildings appeared abandoned, but thermal imaging revealed activity in the underground levels. If we could access the facility, we could save not just Major and the other survivors, but potentially shut down any new subjects they might have created. The weight of the decision was staggering. They could perform the deactivation procedure here, in the relative safety of the mine, with medical support and controlled conditions. But that would save only Major, leaving the other subjects vulnerable and the technology intact for future exploitation. Or they could attempt to infiltrate the original facility, use Walter's codes to shut down the entire system, but risk everything. In a confrontation with Meridian Solutions on their home ground, Major, who had been resting quietly during the preparations, suddenly stood and moved to Walter. He placed his paw on the lockdown codes, then looked directly at each person in the chamber. His message was unmistakable. He understood the choice, and he was willing to risk his own life to protect others like him. "He's right," Walter said, his voice filled with a father's pride for both his human daughter and his canine companion. "We can't save Major while leaving the others to face this alone." Dr. Voss began packing her equipment. "Then we take the surgical unit with us. If we're going to infiltrate the facility, we'll need to be prepared to perform the deactivation procedure under less than ideal conditions." Sarah was already coordinating with her network, calling in resources that Elise hadn't known existed. Other vehicles arrived at the mine veterinarians, former Meridian employees, even some families who had been caring for enhanced animals for years. The scope of the protection network was astounding. "How long have you all been planning for this?" Elise asked. "Since the day the facility officially closed," one of the veterinarians replied. "We knew the technology was too valuable to be simply abandoned. Some of us have been preparing for 30 years. As they loaded equipment and prepared for the journey to the Meridian facility, Walter shared more details about the original complex. "The underground levels go down 7 stories, he explained, using the architectural blueprints to plan their approach. "The main computer systems are on level 5, but the neural integration laboratories are on level 7, the deepest part of the facility." "Security?" Sarah asked. 30 years ago, it was extensive. Motion sensors, automated defensive systems, even some experimental security measures we never fully understood. Walter's expression was grim. "If they've been maintaining the facility, they've likely upgraded everything." Dr. Voss finished her equipment check and looked at Major, who had been watching the preparations with obvious understanding. "Are you ready, old friend?" she asked gently. "This is going to be the hardest thing any of us has ever attempted." Major moved to each person in the group, making physical contact, a paw on Walter's hand, a gentle head bump against Sarah's shoulder, a nose touch to Elise's palm. It was clearly a farewell gesture, his way of acknowledging that he might not survive what was ahead, but that he was grateful for their efforts on his behalf. "No," Elise said firmly. "This isn't goodbye. We're all going to make it through this together, and when we do, Major is going to be free, truly free, for the first time in his life." The convoy that left the mine included veterinary vehicles, communication equipment, and people who had been living with this secret for decades. As they drove through the mountain roads toward the Meridian facility, Sarah coordinated with other teams across the country who were moving to protect the remaining subjects. "The facility is about 2 hours away," Walter said, consulting maps and checking equipment. "We should arrive just after dark, which will help with concealment but make the infiltration more dangerous." Through the vehicle's communication system, they could monitor Meridian Solutions operations. The corporate teams were systematically closing in on the last 2 subjects, their efficiency suggesting they had been planning this collection for years. "Subject 31 has been located in Wyoming," one intercept reported. "Family cooperation secured, transport authorized." "Subject 78 showing signs of implant instability," another voice reported. "Priority recovery recommended." Each transmission reminded them that time was running out, not just for Major, but for every remaining survivor of the original project. The technology that had been designed to enhance and protect animals had become their greatest vulnerability. As the sun set behind the mountains, the convoy approached the perimeter of the Meridian facility. From a distance, it looked exactly as Walter remembered, a collection of innocuous buildings that concealed one of the most sophisticated research complexes ever constructed. But thermal imaging revealed the truth. The underground levels were fully active, with heat signatures indicating dozens of people working in laboratories that officially didn't exist. Whatever Meridian Solutions was doing in those hidden chambers, they had been preparing for this moment as long as Walter's protection network had been planning to stop them. "Emergency lockdown codes ready," Walter said, his fingers steady on the device despite 30 years of waiting for this moment. "Surgical unit prepared," Dr. Vos confirmed, her equipment calibrated for field operation. "Network coordination established," Sarah added, her connection spanning the country. Major lay quietly in the back of the lead vehicle, his enhanced senses undoubtedly detecting dangers that his human companions couldn't perceive. But his eyes held no fear, only the steady resolve of an animal who had finally found humans worthy of his trust. The Meridian facility waited ahead, its secrets buried 7 stories underground, protected by security systems that had been designed to keep the truth hidden forever. But for the first time in 30 years, the people approaching its gates were united not by the desire to exploit consciousness, but by the determination to set it free. The infiltration of the Meridian facility began at midnight, when the skeletal night crew would be at its smallest and most vulnerable. Walter's knowledge of the facility's original layout proved invaluable, though they discovered immediately that 30 years of corporate ownership had brought significant changes to the surface security. "Motion sensors every 20 feet, Sarah whispered into her communication headset as she monitored the approach routes. "Thermal imaging on the main buildings and what looks like pressure plates around the primary entrances." But Walter had anticipated this. His lockdown codes weren't just for the computer systems. They included override commands for the facility's entire security infrastructure. As they approached the perimeter fence, he activated a sequence that had been programmed decades ago by engineers who never imagined it would be used for infiltration rather than emergency evacuation. The security systems went dark in a cascade, failure that appeared to be a routine maintenance shutdown. Guards would notice eventually, but the override would give them precious minutes to reach the underground levels, where the real work was being conducted. Dr. Voss had modified her surgical equipment for mobile operation, creating a portable version of the neural deactivation system that could interface with the facility's original computer terminals. "If we can reach the main integration laboratory," she explained as they moved through the darkened surface buildings, "I can use the original Meridian computers to safely map and deactivate implants throughout the entire network." The entrance to the underground levels was exactly where Walter remembered, concealed behind what appeared to be a maintenance door in the facility's main laboratory building. But when they opened it, they found that the stairwell had been modernized with state-of-the-art security measures. "Biometric scanners," Sarah observed, studying the checkpoint that blocked their path. "Retinal scanning, fingerprint analysis, and what looks like DNA sampling capability." Walter approached the scanner with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 30 years. "They never removed my biometric data from the system," he said, placing his hand on the scanner. "I was still technically employed when the facility shut down, and government contractors never delete anything." The scanner accepted his credentials, and the stairwell access unlocked with a soft hiss of pressurized air. But as they descended into the facility's depths, it became clear that the underground levels were far more active than their intelligence had suggested. Level 1 housed what appeared to be administrative offices and meeting rooms, all empty at this hour but showing signs of recent occupation. Level 2 contained updated versions of the original animal housing facilities, clean, Modern enclosures that were currently empty, but had obviously been designed for larger subjects than the dogs and cats of the original project. They're planning to scale up, Elise realized as they passed through the facility. These enclosures are designed for human subjects. Level 3 revealed the truth of Meridian Solutions' current operations. Laboratory spaces filled with advanced neural interface equipment, computer systems displaying brain scan data from unknown subjects, and most disturbing of all, holding cells that were clearly designed for human occupancy. Corporate espionage wasn't their endgame, Walter said grimly. They want to apply the technology to their own personnel, create enhanced intelligence. Operatives who can't be detected by conventional security measures. The sound of footsteps echoing from deeper in the facility indicated that their infiltration hadn't gone entirely unnoticed. Security teams were moving through the lower levels, conducting what appeared to be routine patrols, but with increasing frequency and urgency. Level 4 contained the original computer terminals that controlled the Meridian implant network. The main terminal was a massive system that had been maintained and upgraded over the decades, its display showing real-time data from dozens of active implants, not just the surviving subjects they knew about, but new implants that had been created and deployed in recent years. There are 47 active implants in the system, Dr. Voss reported as she interfaced her equipment with the terminal. 23 are the original test subjects, but 24 are new and based on the neural patterns. Some of them aren't in animals. The implications sent ice through Elise's veins. Meridian Solutions hadn't just been planning to collect the surviving animal subjects. They had been using the technology on human volunteers, creating a network of enhanced operatives who could gather intelligence while appearing to be ordinary people. Walter's lockdown codes granted them access to the system's deepest levels of control. The original Meridian computer network had been designed with multiple failsafes, including the ability to remotely deactivate any implant in the event of a security breach or ethical violation. The deactivation sequence is ready, Dr. Voss announced. But once we start this process, we can't stop it. Every implant in the network will be permanently disabled within 15 minutes. Major, who had been resting quietly during their descent through the facility, suddenly stood and moved to the computer terminal. His enhanced hearing had detected something the humans had missed, the sound of elevators in motion, security teams converging on their location from multiple levels. "We're about to have company," Sarah said, monitoring communication intercepts on her tablet. Multiple teams moving to level 4. Estimated arrival in 3 minutes. The moment of truth had arrived. They could activate the deactivation sequence and free every enhanced subject in the network, but they would have to defend their position long enough for the process to complete. The alternative was to attempt escape and leave the technology intact, allowing Meridian Solutions to continue their expansion into human enhancement. Walter looked at his daughter, then at Major, then at the computer terminal that controlled the fate of dozens of enhanced beings. "Activate the sequence," he said firmly. "Whatever happens next, we finish what we started 30 years ago." The deactivation sequence began with a low hum that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Dr. Voss's equipment interfaced with the original Meridian systems, and suddenly every screen in the laboratory lit up with data streams showing the locations and status of implants across the country. The process was irreversible, now within 15 minutes. Every enhanced subject in the network would be free of their technological burden. But freedom came with a price. The facility's security teams had reached level 4, and the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridors indicated they were facing a coordinated response from people who understood exactly what was at stake. Walter moved to the laboratory's entrance, his old security badge still active after 30 years of dormancy. As the first tactical operatives rounded the corner, he stepped into view with his hands raised, the badge clearly visible on his chest. "Walter Brennan, Meridian Security," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who belonged. "In this place, I'm executing emergency protocol. 7 facility-wide implant deactivation due to ethical violations and security breach." The tactical team leader paused, clearly recognizing both the badge and the protocol. "Mr. Brennan, you're not authorized to be in this facility. Please step aside and allow us to secure the area." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Walter replied, calmly. "As the senior surviving security officer from the original Meridian project, I'm invoking my authority to protect the welfare of all test subjects, both animal and human." Behind him, the deactivation sequence continued its work. On the monitoring screens, Elise could see the real-time effects as implants across the network began shutting down. Some subjects showed immediate signs of relief, animals whose behavior normalized for the first time in years. Others experienced more dramatic responses as their enhanced cognitive functions adjusted to the absence of technological support. Sarah worked frantically at her communication station, coordinating with their network of protectors across the country. "Teams are standing by at all known subject locations," she reported. "Veterinarians and medical personnel ready to provide support as the implants deactivate." The tactical team leader spoke into his radio, receiving orders that clearly didn't satisfy him. "Mr. Brennan, I have instructions to terminate the deactivation sequence and secure all personnel for questioning. You need to understand that this technology represents years of development and millions of dollars in investment." "And you need to understand," Walter replied, "that this technology has been used without consent on both animal and human subjects. The ethical violations alone justify permanent shutdown." Dr. Voss looked up from her monitoring station. 60% complete, she announced. "The process is stabilizing. Enhanced subjects are retaining their improved cognitive abilities while shedding the surveillance and control elements. Through the facility's communication system, they could hear reports from other levels. Directors and corporate executives were arriving, their voices angry and desperate as they realized that decades of secret research and development were being permanently disabled. "Sir," one of the tactical operatives said to his team leader, "we're getting reports that some of our enhanced operatives in the field are experiencing system failures. Whatever they're doing down here is affecting our active personnel." The team leader's expression shifted as he understood the full implications. This wasn't just about animal welfare. The deactivation sequence was compromising active intelligence operations that relied on enhanced human operatives. Major, who had been monitoring the situation with his characteristic intelligence, suddenly moved to Walter's side. But instead of seeking protection, he stepped forward toward the tactical team, his posture calm and non-threatening. "He's trying to communicate," Elise realized. "Major understands that these people see him as property, and he's trying to show them that he's a conscious being making his own choices." The German Shepherd approached the team leader slowly, maintaining eye contact in a way that clearly demonstrated intelligence and intent. When he reached the man, he gently placed his paw on the tactical officer's boot, not a trick or a command response, but a deliberate gesture of recognition between two conscious beings. The effect was profound. The team leader stared down at Major, seeing perhaps for the first time not a piece of enhanced military hardware, but an individual who had been making conscious decisions about his own life for over a decade. 80% complete, Dr. Voss announced. Neural pathways are stabilizing across the network. The enhanced subjects are retaining their cognitive improvements while rejecting the control and surveillance elements. Sarah's communication. Equipment erupted with reports from around the country. Families with enhanced pets were reporting that their animals seemed more relaxed, more themselves than they had been in years. The few human subjects in the network were experiencing similar relief as the invasive technological elements shut down while preserving the beneficial enhancements. But most importantly, the surveillance network that had been documenting American communities for over a decade was going permanently dark. Whatever intelligence Meridian Solutions had hoped to gather or sell was being systematically erased. "Mr. Brennan," the team leader said finally, his voice carrying a new tone of respect, "I have orders to stop this process, but I also have eyes to see what's happening here. That animal made a choice about his own medical treatment. I've never seen anything like it." Walter looked at his original security badge, the symbol of authority that had protected him one last time after 30 years. "Then you understand why. Some secrets are worth keeping, and some technologies are too dangerous to exist." The deactivation sequence reached completion just as more security teams arrived at level 4. But something had changed in the facility's atmosphere. The recognition that they weren't dealing with stolen property, but with conscious beings who had finally been given the right to choose their own fate. 6 months after the deactivation of the Meridian implant network, Cedar Falls had become a very different place. The quiet mountain town that had once been Elise's refuge from the past had transformed into a hub of revolutionary research in consciousness, animal cognition, and the ethical application of enhancement technology. The Cedar Falls Veterinary Clinic had expanded into a full research facility, with Dr. Catherine Voss joining as co-director and Sarah Brennan. She had legally reclaimed her birth name, serving as coordinator for the Enhanced Animal Welfare Network. The memorial wall that dominated the clinic's main entrance told the story of Project Meridian with unflinching honesty, honoring both the animals who had suffered and the people who had worked to protect them. Each nameplate on the memorial wall represented not just a test subject, but a conscious being whose experience had contributed to humanity's understanding of the relationship between technology and consciousness. Subject 47 Major held the place of honor at the center, his photograph showing him not as he had been in the laboratory, but as he was now, free, healthy, and surrounded by the family that had chosen to stand with him. Walter and Major had taken up residence in a cabin just outside town, close enough for regular veterinary checkups, but far enough away to maintain the quiet life they both preferred. The deactivation process had been successful beyond their most optimistic projections. Major retained all of his enhanced intelligence and emotional depth while being freed from the surveillance and control systems that had made him an unwitting spy for over a decade. The remarkable thing, Dr. Voss explained to the congressional committee that had been formed to investigate the Meridian revelations, is that the enhanced animals didn't lose their special qualities when we removed the technological elements. The neural pathways that developed around the implants became permanent features of their cognition. They're genuinely more intelligent, more emotionally sophisticated, more capable of complex communication than their unenhanced counterparts. The political fallout from the Meridian exposures had been extensive. Meridian Solutions had been disbanded, its executives facing criminal charges for conducting unauthorized experiments on both animals and humans. The discovery that they had been testing neural enhancement technology on their own employees without full informed consent had triggered the largest bioethics investigation in American history. But perhaps more importantly, the revelation that consciousness could be successfully enhanced through technological integration had opened entirely new fields of research. Universities across the country were establishing programs in enhanced consciousness studies, with Elise's father's research serving as the foundational text for understanding how biological and artificial intelligence could coexist. On a warm September morning, Elise made her usual rounds through the expanded clinic. The facility now housed not just the traditional veterinary services that had been her life's work, but also research laboratories where scientists studied the long-term effects of the enhancement process on animal cognition and behavior. In the main research lab, She found Sarah working with a team of ethicists and veterinarians to establish protocols for future enhancement research, if society ever chose to pursue such work again. The difference was that this time, the focus was on consent, welfare, and the rights of enhanced beings, rather than on military or commercial applications. "Any word from the other survivors?" Elise asked, checking the status board that tracked all the former Meridian subjects. Subject 23 is doing beautifully with his family in Montana. They've started a program using his enhanced capabilities to help search and rescue operations, with his full cooperation, of course. Sarah smiled at the reports streaming in from around the country. Subject 31 has become something of a celebrity in Wyoming. The local newspaper did a feature story about his ability to predict weather patterns 3 days in advance. The success stories were remarkable, but they were balanced by the sobering reality of what the animals had endured. Not every subject had survived the deactivation process, and some had experienced lasting effects from decades of technological integration. The memorial wall included names of those who hadn't made it, their sacrifice honored alongside those who had. Walter appeared in the laboratory doorway, Major at his side as always. The old man had found a new purpose in his later years, working with the network to identify and support other families who had unknowingly adopted enhanced animals. His expertise in the original technology had proven invaluable in understanding how to care for beings whose consciousness existed at the intersection of biology and technology. "Dr. Monroe," he said, using the formal address that had become their comfortable routine, "there's someone here to see you." The visitor was a young woman in her 20s, accompanied by a border collie whose intelligent eyes immediately marked him as something special. "Dr. Monroe, I'm Jennifer Walsh, and this is Einstein. I think he might be one of the animals you helped." Elise knelt beside the border collie, seeing immediately the telltale signs of enhanced intelligence in his posture and attention. But more than that, she saw something that had become familiar over the past months, the look of an animal who understood that he was finally among people who recognized his true nature. "Hello, Einstein," she said gently. "We've been hoping to meet you." The dog's response was immediate and unmistakable. He moved to the memorial wall and sat directly in front of the nameplate for Subject 23, his head tilted in a gesture that clearly indicated recognition and memory. "He's been different since that night 6 months ago," Jennifer explained. "Calmer, more himself somehow, but also more aware of everything around him. I did some research and found your clinic, and when I saw the stories about the other animals, you realized Einstein had been carrying a secret for years," Sarah finished, her voice gentle with understanding. "You're not the first family to come forward, and you won't be the last." As the afternoon wore on, the clinic filled with its usual mix of routine veterinary patients and extraordinary cases. Enhanced animals receiving checkups, researchers documenting the long-term effects of consciousness expansion, and families learning to understand pets who were far more than they had ever imagined. At the end of the day, Elise found herself standing before the memorial wall, reading the names, and remembering the journey that had brought them all to this point. Her father's vision, a world where consciousness in all its forms was respected and protected, was becoming reality. One patient at a time, Major approached and gently pressed his head against her hand, a gesture of comfort and gratitude that needed no enhancement to convey its meaning. In his eyes, she saw not just the intelligence that technology had given him, but the wisdom that came from choosing to trust humans who had finally proven worthy of that trust. The memorial wall would continue to grow as more enhanced animals were identified and brought into the network of protection and care. But it would also serve as a reminder that consciousness, whether born or made, natural or enhanced, deserved dignity, respect, and above all, the right to choose its own path. In the quiet mountain town of Cedar Falls, That choice had finally been given the recognition it deserved.